A game 12 years in the making finally released, and I gave it a try right away. I've got some initial impressions that I'm cautiously backing away from now, but I'll get to that stuff in a few moments. This is Robert with Society Case Files coming back to you with a first impressions video. If you like this content, please be sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell. Otherwise, let's dive into Stalker 2: Heart of Chernobyl. I played the original, but I only barely remember it. I recall running around a wall, being torn apart by monsters, and weird stuff happening off in the distance. I mean, it was kind of cool, but I just didn't get it. And most of the games I played back then were a lot more, well, let's just say they held your hand a lot more. And because I was used to that hand holding, I just didn't really get into the game so much. But a lot's changed since then. I've played tons of FPS games that are a little bit more sandbox oriented. So this one, I think I came at with a much more positive attitude. And while there is a tutorial, it doesn't really tell you that much, or maybe I missed a few things. That's perfectly possible as well. But I figured out most of it on my own quickly enough. They're not the most complicated systems per se, and you can figure them out easily enough, but they do make the difference between life and death until you know what they mean. So things like breaking weapons, finding people to fix them, figuring out how to sell them, catching on that you're bleeding or hungry. I didn't catch any of that in the tutorial, and if it was there, then that's entirely my bad. When I did finally find a guy to fix my stuff, he seemed to only be able to fix the gear I had equipped, which I didn't dive in too deep because I didn't have that much with me to begin with. And then later on, I found out that even repairing broken guns isn't worth it because they sell for less than it costs you to fix them. All that's kind of jumping into the weeds a little bit fast, so let's take one step back. Stalker 2 has a bit of that Fallout survival mode feel to it, with all the different conditions that you can experience throughout the game: hunger, bleeding, etc., and a bunch of other stuff that you have to manage as you go along. So you've got stamina that runs out when you're sprinting or jumping, and that can be restored with energy drinks, which is just hilariously terrible. Food helps take away the hunger while also offering some health restoration. Booze can reduce your radiation, but it increases hunger. Bandages have the ability to restore some health, but are primarily used to stop bleeding. And then there's anti-radiation drugs, which really do feel like Rad X, and the list goes on. There's a lot of loot and gear to use in the game, and it didn't seem super hard to find it. My biggest trouble was keeping bullets, because a lot of things do like to take more than 2 or 3 shots to kill. As far as weapons go, you can modify the guns with attachments, switch firing modes when applicable, and you have to conserve your ammo because, like I just said, it doesn't grow on trees, at least not in the beginning. And also, spray and pray is a really bad idea. Aiming is very important, especially when fighting normal humans. You can take them down very quickly with headshots. Otherwise, their bodies take way more than they should, especially considering how few you can take before you're bleeding and almost dying. You've got grenades and pistols, sawed-off shotguns, machine guns, basically 35 guns at the start, and there will be more with DLCs. You really want to make sure that you have some diversity, in my opinion, because then you will have enough different types of ammo to use in specific situations. Like, as an example, the sawed-off shotgun, really good against people, terrible against hopping rats, which that sounds funny because in a tight tunnel with a whole bunch of rats there, the sawed-off shotgun should have been a great option, and you should have been able to just sort of aim it in that general direction and let it go and seen rat popcorn, but that's not the case. Anyway, the big problem when it comes to ammo is dealing with the flat-out mutated monster things. You can load them up pretty well on the standard difficulty before they go down, and this is where some of my issues with the game crop up. First, the game feels really floaty in general. Walking around, turning, even jumping doesn't feel like you're in the environment entirely. I got the sense I was turning on a plate and there wasn't any sort of resistance or sound to suggest a quick turn or a move that might have otherwise given you a little bit of weight to the game, maybe a huff, or I don't know, something. And combat is kind of the same way. The guns don't have any real power to them for me. Not entirely. And I do have a contrary opinion about that too, which I'll talk about in just a second. It's not in the same way of something like Tarkov or even in Call of Duty, where some of the guns really do have some oomph behind them. Now, the exception in this game for me is the sawed-off shotgun does give you a good sense of it being powerful. And the pistol, when it's silenced, has a really cool displacement of the sound as opposed to turning it into airsoft gun, it really does have that displaced crack, and that gave it some weight. But like the machine gun and the pistol without the silencer, especially when shooting things that take tons of shots, they just felt like pop guns, and that was kind of lame. When enemies are shot, they do make sounds, but they don't necessarily respond physically. So like I shot a guy 5 times and he just stood there and continued shooting back. He didn't like jerk around or try to take cover or anything. And that was kind of weird. Monsters in particular just go from charging to being dead. So he was running at me, big mutated blobby monster dog, and he's alive, and then he's on his side and he's just not moving. Now, what kind of sucked about that is that they might still be alive, because at one point I thought that I had taken care of it because it sort of stopped moving and I walked by and it just jumped up and attacked me again. That may have been a bug. I don't know. There are a few, and we can talk about those in a moment as well. But the way it works now, it just looks janky and it lacks any real impact for winning the fight, especially when you're like, I don't know, is that thing dead? And you put another couple rounds in it for no reason because it actually is dead. Anyway, I'm not super fond of that part, and I'm hoping that gets fixed and they add something, especially since I just read right before I started filming this that the developer claimed that everything is handcrafted. If that's the case, then I can't see them forgetting to add a death animation for their creepy monsters. Let's talk about the graphics really quick. I love the way Stalker 2 looks. It has an awesome atmosphere. It just feels creepy when you're wandering around. The backgrounds are just amazing. I love them. I have no problems with those at all. They do have some glitching. Specifically, there is some textures that just flicker on walls occasionally, and sometimes stuff just disappears. But I mean, this is day one. I'm sure there's going to be a decent patch coming soon to fix some of this kind of stuff, because once the wall decides that it's time for a rave, it distracts you. It kind of does pull you out of the moment, and that's not great. Though, aside from that, I loved wandering around in the woods, and especially at the very beginning, it was legit scary, especially considering my first experience with a monster in the game landed me with 4 deaths, just because I was freaking out, and I was spraying and praying, and that's definitely not the tactic you want to take in this game. And monsters aren't the only threat. They're these anomaly things that can cause serious damage, even throwing you around or killing you pretty much instantly. There's ways to spot them and deal with them, such as you can throw one of these endless bolts you have in your inventory after a guy gives you one. They just endlessly spawn for you in your pack, I guess. I rarely use them because I always forget and then face tank the anomaly and either die or just take considerable damage. But those are some things to consider with the game. It doesn't want you to sprint everywhere, that's for sure. You're expected to travel, see the landscape, kind of explore. Don't barrel around like a crazy person, as I did, because I'm an impatient ass. It'll punish you for trying to do so, usually fatally. However, the good news is that the autosave is pretty good, though once it did autosave me when I was half a second from bleeding to death. That was a good time because I spawned in and died, spawned in and died. Awesome stuff. There aren't any stats to buy up, no skills to acquire. There are more effective weapons and outfits to help protect you, but that's the extent of quote-unquote leveling up. This isn't a game where you can rely on gaining some special skill that's going to make it easy to float through the rest of the game. And while you do have side quests, they're for resources and story rather than becoming inherently more powerful. Although, on that note, there are moments that are sort of role-playing-esque where you have some choices to make on what happens to certain people and how you're going to overcome a particular objective, and I thought that was very cool. The game does have a few performance issues. On an i9 processor with 64 gigs of RAM and a 4090, I probably shouldn't have had a janky experience, but I did. Even though I'm not playing at 4K, I still had moments where the game hesitated while I was turning to the left or right. Just a brief moment. It wasn't too big, and it didn't really impair my ability to play, but it was noticeable, and I'm guessing that, like I mentioned before, it will definitely get fixed. I'm kind of reminded of when I played Fallout 4 on VR with how some of the game feels. When I had the pistol, the floatiness was fine because the controller itself had some weight, and so when you're flailing it around, it didn't feel quite so ridiculous. But once you got the minigun, it was like you were flailing a balloon animal around, and it just lost the immersion. And Stalker 2's lack of weight, lack of punch with the guns pulls me out of it a little. Even though a human will go down with a headshot, they can still take quite a few rounds to the chest and body, which is kind of absurd given how squishy your character is. I get that the mutated radioactive monsters are hardcore. They're basically blobs of contaminated jumbo jacks. But regular guys shouldn't be taking 5 or 6 rounds regardless of where they're hit. And that leads me to the suicidal nature of the NPCs. Sometimes they run away when they've taken too much damage, but they always come back. And I do mean always. Like, they can't help themselves. A radioactive dog might be 1 shot away from death, but it will come back regardless for you to take care of it. And the AI isn't super bright either. I got in a firefight and took cover. The guy just turned around and started clearing another room. And that's not the only crazy thing they've done. I've shot a guy a couple times and he ran out and then just went back to his little fire pit and hung out in front of it. It was kind of funny. I don't even know what the AI was thinking in that one. I couldn't even make something up. Inventory is a little strange too. Red icon weapons can't be sold because they're broken. So you might as well dump them because repairing them costs more than selling them, as I mentioned earlier. You can unload weapons straight from the ground to take their ammo, which I thought was really nice. But it's interesting that when you're looting stuff, of course, the game doesn't pause. So you can actually get morched while you're trying to grab things. So it becomes imperative to just hit the R key to take everything and then just deal with the broken stuff later. The inability to sell broken guns makes some sense to me because I don't really think they want you to become wealthy beyond reckoning after you come back into town looking like you just looted a Cabela's. The story seems kind of interesting. I don't want to go into it too much for spoilers and that sort of thing, though I did find that I became a bit lost a few times. The voice acting is pretty jarring and some of the events don't make a lot of sense, but that might just be me. I'm happy to admit that I'm probably an idiot. If you can get over some of the cheesy B-movie level acting, and you'll probably be fine with what's going on, I think it's compelling enough to keep playing. It drove me to go on to the next mission each time, and I thought that was nice. Because the last game I played, I just sort of sat there and was like, I don't really see the purpose in that. Maybe I'll do a review on that, though it'll probably be really short. Anyway, those are my first impressions of Stalker 2. When they clean up some of the bugs and glitches, that'll help things a lot, but it's already pretty solid. I'm not entirely sure why they played the review embargo so tight. That seemed silly considering how well it worked for me right off the bat. I got it on Game Pass, which is notorious for being crap with games, like I couldn't even play Call of Duty on it. I did that because, frankly, I was concerned I wouldn't like it at all. And if I'm being very honest, the first half hour was rough. I almost gave up on it. I was not having fun. I found it very frustrating and too janky. And that's what I was talking about at the very beginning when I said that I was cautiously backing away from my first impressions because I think they were honestly wrong. Anyway, I'm glad I pushed on, and I think it'll be a pretty cool experience, one that should keep people busy for quite a while, frankly. Have you played Stalker 2? Did you like the original? Were you pumped up for this one? Let me know in the comments below. This is Robert with Society Case Files signing off.